Welcome back. We're exactly a month away from the national election, and it seems like the ruling party is failing to garner more voters. According to a survey by global market research firm Ipsos, ANC support could fall to 40.2% this year. And it's under this backdrop that voters head to the polls with risks of a coalition government. And joining me now to get a world view on what investors expect when it comes to the local elections is Krutham's Peter Attard Montalt. Thank you so much for your time, Peter. Of course, it is a crucial election. How have you viewed the electioneering mood and approach so far?
Good evening. Well, I think the election campaign itself has obviously been delayed by the lack of money that parties have. They're saving money for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so. The contestation of ideas has been relatively limited. There's also been a lot of speeches on policy, but relatively little ping pong of ideas and contestation. And so markets really are focused on the uncertainty, I think too much so, sort of throwing hands in the air partly on the range of outcomes, the uncertainty around outcomes. We've been trying to map a path through that, but I think the end result has been there's been relatively little positioning by investors, actually. Positioning is relatively light going into this election, which is a little bit of a surprise.
Well, talking about ideas, because, as voters, we're looking for something new, something fresh, solutions to challenges that we can't take anymore. And I'm not sure if we can expect that from the big parties. There, of course, are lots of other smaller parties coming into the fore. Do you maybe think that they have enough muscle for these new ideas, or do we just expect things on the ideas side to kind of remain on status quo?
Well, thankfully, some issues like the death penalty and sending pregnant teenagers to Robben Island are not taking hold in the wider debate. But no, I mean, there is a lot of contestation that's been trying to be pushed by the DA in particular. A very detailed economic manifesto released last Friday that is almost too detailed, I think, for the public debate. It's actually interesting in the sense of it's more a statement of intent around the coalition and what they would want to do in a coalition. So it's interesting from a sort of election analyst point of view, but less so from the public. I think the problem here is everyone is offering some version of managerialism, in the sense of doing it better than other parties. And that's a very, very hard thing to campaign on. I mean, these policy issues around that, how you solve it, are relatively dull, actually, and relatively hard to debate in an open debate, either with other parties they've been on the radio and TV, or in terms of speeches. And on the doorstep. And unfortunately, that's what this comes down to. I mean, for the DA to implement this manifesto last Friday, for the ANC to pull through on its promises of being allowed more time, this is ultimately about needing the state capacity to be able to deliver those things.
Yeah, well, talking about the DA, of course, we have to zoom into the multi-party charter. And it's been quite interesting to see the different comments coming out of different parties within that multi-party charter. A lot of them kind of throwing jabs at each other, which is quite interesting because I feel like you're supposed to be operating under one cloud because, obviously you are looking for people to vote for that pact. I mean, how solid is that pact right now?
Well, we don't believe it exists in any meaningful sense. It's a very useful sort of thing to have before the elections, some broad coordination in terms of messaging, etc. But I think the thing will disappear a day after the election, if not before, and very much will be each party for itself. Let's not forget a large number of the smaller parties in the MPC won't emerge into Parliament at all. Some of them aren't even actually on the ballot paper. And you simply don't need this cohesive group that I think would bring more drama to a coalition than it's worth. I think the ANC will pick off the DA, the IFP, and whoever else it needs to do coalition negotiations at national and provincial level. And I think this is, again, one of the areas where investors offshore and onshore have got the wrong end of the stick by considering somehow the ANC has to form a coalition with the MPC. I don't think that's how it's going to work at all.
Yeah, well, actually, just talking about the markets, of course, there is an underlying election risk there in the currency and also in the financial market. But to what extent have we seen this, and are investors welcoming the coalition talks or not? And are there particular events or assumptions that have maybe spooked the market significantly so far?
Well, the market is operating under, I think, an odd pretext, which is that the lower the ANC is, the worse the outcome is. And that's not true, actually. I think we have to divorce the way a coalition can come together and the preference choices between, say, the DA versus the EFF. We're very strongly, and it's a very high conviction of ours, that the ANC-NEC will not choose the EFF, at national level at least. That issue is totally separate from what the vote outcome is. And I think this is why the market's got the wrong end of the stick. But what we've seen, though, is as the SRF daily polling rises now over time, we are seeing then the markets rally back a little bit as it's taking the number as being important. I think it's around a little bit of the currency move at the moment. The moves in the bond market, I think, are a little more complex than about Treasury's issuance strategy.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about how they really were not expecting any new ideas, and parties are kind of coming out with their managerial kind of advertising here. In terms of the work that is waiting for the elected party, in your opinion piece on Business Day, you talk about the onion problem in South Africa. Just paint a picture of the layers that have already been peeled off and what is needed to be pulled off so that we can get to more layers as we head to that core of the onion.
So the onion problem is all about the complexity of doing structural reform when you particularly don't have much state capacity. And so the outer layer, for instance, superficially is like we have to solve load shedding, we have to solve the number of movements in terms of freight logistics. But as you peel back the layers, things get much more complicated. So, for instance, you need to have wheeling happening. The way wheeling happens is hugely complicated. You need more transmission investment. As a report we put out last week with Meridian showed, huge complexities there in terms of the tariff makeup in particular, but also issues around de-risking these things that start coming out. It's the same in logistics as well, where to get the private sector involved, you need a regulatory setup, you need legal and legislative framework that's now been put in place. You need tariffs again around these things that we're seeing with the network statement. So it's these continual elements, but it's the process of going through the onion which is hard here for the government. There have been, I think, a very solid and crack team of people in Operation Vulindlela, but very small. And I think the idea is in a coalition, you potentially have more eyes on the ball who can unfurl the complexity of doing coalition, think several layers ahead, and unpick some of those dependencies that really have to get moving. Because I think otherwise there will obviously be disappointment, whether it's on transmission, investment speed, or logistics.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We do have to wrap up the conversation, Peter. Always appreciated. That was Peter Attard Montalt from Krutham.